Challenges, Opportunities, Strategies, and Tactics to Address Water Quality Issues in Hawaii will feature Roger Babcock, Director, Department of Environmental Services, City and County of Honolulu. Also Christina Comfort, Program Manager, VI, Wastewater Alternatives and Innovations. Lauren Roth-Venu, Principal, Roth Ecological Design International, LLC. And Tao Yan, Professor, Civil and Environmental Engineering, UH Manoa. Sina Pruder from the State Department of Health was unable to be here today. This session will be moderated by George Yarbrough, Innovation and Entrepreneurship Programs Director, UH Office of Innovation and Commercialization. And just a quick note for the Q&A portion, we ask that everyone with questions to please come up to the microphone right here in the front. Since the conference is being recorded, we want to make sure that we pick up both the answers as well as the questions on the recording. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to George.
Aloha. Thank you very much for being here. Thanks for introducing. I thought I would have to do that. Before we start, can anyone in the private sector raise their hand? Anyone in the regulatory body, working for a regulatory body, raise their hand? They're all just right there. Professors at UH, faculty, students, legislators. We have one. All right, sounds good. All right, thank you everyone for being here, and send our best wishes to Sina. So I want to just kind of flow the conversation from why is water quality and resiliency important, what does it look like to you, and then kind of like, we spoke a little bit about challenges earlier, but maybe we can focus on challenges in the field of work that you work in. And then going into opportunities, and then we can kind of talk about innovations. I know the three of you do a lot of innovation. You probably receive a lot of the asks on innovation, if that's correct. And then what I like to kind of talk about is like, all right, so that's so what, now what do we do? And so I'll ask a magic wand question at the end and to see what they think. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. So we'll start with you, Roger. When you think of water resiliency and water quality, why have you chosen to dedicate your career to water? Why is it important to you?
Yeah, thanks, George. I guess I've always been interested in water, and it's a limited resource, obviously, and we need to make sure that we have enough. So I've mostly been a wastewater person. So I've been interested in water recycling and water reuse, and how we can do that in various forms for different kinds of end uses. So there's different levels of quality and stuff that we can do, including and all the way up to potable reuse, which is a thing on the mainland now and in other countries, not necessarily needed here. But it's the challenges are interesting. The technology aspect of it is interesting, and how it affects everybody. So I guess that's why I enjoy working in water.
And I'll punt it over to you, Christina. Why have you dedicated your focus to water?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm an oceanographer, actually, and I kind of came to this kind of more land-focused water research through oceanography. I kind of started out with my research in deeper ocean waters, and I just found that I was interested in the ocean and coastal interface and working there. So I actually volunteered as the co-chair of the Surfrider Foundation's Blue Water Task Force, which is a citizen science program that measures water quality all around the island. And through that, I got involved with the cesspool and sewage pollution issue in Hawaii. And as I was learning more and more about this, Maukatamakai water connections, suddenly I was like a deep sea oceanographer, found myself at the summit of the Ko'olaus pulling out Angiopteris ferns and trying to restore native forests on the summit. So I just became really intrigued with this, the one water approach, and trying to you work among different sectors to find holistic solutions. And I guess initially, I just have always loved water. I'm a surfer, an ocean person. So yeah, that's how I got here.
Is this mic on? Okay. So I guess for me, definitely water is being one of these things that connects all life, and having an interest in the natural systems and the natural world. Water is definitely central to that, and obviously affects all of us as communities. Really, my career started, in my undergrad, I went to the University of Colorado at Boulder, and they literally had a program that got a degree in water. And so that started my pathway in freshwater, and really learning about a lot of the problems that were going on in terms of, policy and community and natural, the ecosystems. It really drove me into my career to enter into this world of innovation and natural systems technologies. And then later I expanded my water world into the ocean and had a degree in oceanography, and actually Ed Laws over here was my advisor. And later then found myself back in the innovation sector in water. And I think it's a space that we can't ignore or take advantage of the quality or availability, especially in these changing times. And so I find it an exciting field, even though it might be boring to some as old infrastructure. I think there's a lot of opportunities for where it can go.
So, I can trace my interest in water back to when I was still very young. I grew up in the rural part of China, and when we used cesspool for our waste disposal, and as you guys have heard enough, we still have cesspools here in Hawaii. So in the southern part of China, we got a lot of rain, so water shortage is not a problem, but water quality is a problem because all this cesspool agriculture and city urban runoff, so on and so forth. So, in terms of why I'm particularly interested in water quality research, I think this is one area that will, the problem will always be there as long as we are using water. We are going to discharge pollutants into water, and there are conventional pollutants like fecal material that we get into our water from cesspool, from wastewater treatment plant, and there are also emerging contaminants that will come up. Some of you probably have heard PFAS and other emerging contaminants. I think this is an area that needs a lot of work. There's a lot of knowledge gap, data gap that has to be filled. So that's why I'm interested in this.
Thanks. I'm going to put you on the spot, Roger, and kind of level setting question. What does water resiliency look like, and how do you define it in your work?
So I think of water resiliency as ability to bounce back or recover from setbacks or inadequacies or issues that happen. My department, Environmental Services, is wastewater and refuse, so we take care of all the 9 treatment plants and the rest of the system. So we have to be able to operate following a disaster or perhaps a cyber attack or periods of drought or other extreme events. So we have to have, for us that means redundancy. It means systems in place that can protect us from ill-intended cyber attacks and things like that, and how we can function under adverse conditions, and how we can get things back in place. So redundancy is a big thing, and so there's clean water and there's wastewater, right? So I'm mostly talking about wastewater and recycled water. We need to be able to continue to operate and be able to make clean water that's safe enough to discharge, right? So we do have a lot of redundancies now that the city didn't used to have. So when you pump sewage, that's called a force main. Most of the wastewater collection system is a gravity system, but we do have places where we have to pump water. And so now there is redundancy on every single pipe that is pumped that's under pressure in the city. Some places there's double redundancy. So that's good. There was a spill into the Hawai Canal a number of years ago, and so we have systems in place such that things like that are extremely unlikely now. So yeah, so I guess that's what it means for our department.
Seemingly like a very infrastructure-focused response, which is
Yeah.
great, and why you're on the panel.
Right.
But I'd like to also invite either of you to speak on how do you define water resiliency, and I'll popcorn it so you can see whoever jumps in first.
Sure. So I come from mostly the design sector and work a lot with private property owners from commercial and so forth. And I mean, for me, resiliency, I think, has to do with scale and timeline. And so are we talking about a single moment, or are we talking about our water security across the state as a whole, like with the Hawaii Freshwater Initiative, for example? How are we building resiliency over time? That we may see the results of climate change in a few decades, but how are we preparing so that we can bounce back or not feel the pain as much if we have a continued drought and increased urbanization and more population and so forth? So there's that piece, and making sure we have enough water as a whole, and the quality's there, and there's enough for not just people, but for our ecosystems. And then I think about scale and resiliency. Are we talking about an individual being able to bounce back after a hurricane or some kind of event? Are we talking about a new building that went in? Or are we talking about the city, right? So those will have different types of solutions. And as Roger kind of alluded to how the city handles it, how can we start thinking about resiliency on a smaller scale, similar to like the renewable energy industry? How do we stay connected, if you will, to the greater infrastructure, but have the ability to be able to operate, whether that's through rainwater harvesting or gray water reuse, or maybe it's a new building with on-site black water treatment. But how do we start thinking about what resiliency looks like at different scales? And that's sort of the future for me of where I think water will be going, if not immediately, will be going the next decade. But how I kind of apply it to my daily life.
Is there anything you wanted to add, Christina, how you define it?
Sure. Yeah, thank you both for your responses so far. I definitely agree with both of those statements. And then I guess to add to that, I think resiliency also would encompass, thinking ahead to the future of, how the ecosystems and the processes that bring water into Hawaii's aquifer, and alongside all of these infrastructure considerations, thinking about native forest conservation, making sure that those aquifer regeneration mechanisms are healthy, and especially in the face of climate change, can still bring the needed water into the aquifer. And then also resiliency in terms of how we think about ideas and innovations and things that we can, if we're hit with an unexpected challenge, that as a community, we have the adaptiveness and creativeness and willingness to think outside the box and move towards new solutions. I think that's also part of long-term resiliency.
Tao, we were speaking at lunch and kind of, talking about your background, growing up in China. Does water resiliency look different? Is it different from China, from your experience in your living in China?
Yeah, I think there are differences, and then there's also a lot of similarities. In China, if you talk about water availability, water quantity issues, so there's this geographic distribution that has to be dealt with. Southern part of China has a lot more water, and northern part of China is very dry. I think if you look at Hawaii, we also kind of have similar issues. Some areas are very wet, and some places are quite dry. So in terms of water resilience, how water is distributed is an important aspect. And also in terms of water quality, which I think is what I'm most interested in, is when you look at water resilience, urban areas versus rural areas, and like Honolulu, we have a lot of pollution potentials, but we'll also have a very sophisticated water infrastructure to handle those. So, when we talk about climate change in the future, if there are extreme weather events, so maybe Honolulu is better positioned to handle water quality issues, have higher resilience capability. Whereas for rural communities, although they don't have as much pollution sources, but they have much less water infrastructure that can handle those, once in 10, 100 year pollution events or rainfall events, then their water quality challenges may be unique and different.
What's keeping you up at night when you think about water quality? Roger, do you want to go first? You're looking at me like it.
Well, so we have a lot of things to do, to worry about, I guess. We have mandates to do a lot of construction work. We have over $2 billion of wastewater infrastructure work in contract right now, and about another $4 billion scheduled in the next 6 years. So one of the things I worry about is construction costs, availability of materials, and how that affects timelines, because we have deadlines that we have to meet. So that's actually, it's an important topic, right, for me. The PFAS is a big thing. Dr. Yan mentioned PFAS. Not so much in the water, but it ends up in our biosolids. So that's where it ends up in wastewater typically. And there is PFAS in our wastewater. We have some data. And there is more PFAS in our biosolids. Some states have, only one state has banned the land application of biosolids altogether. Doesn't matter how much PFAS is in it or what else is in it, it's banned, and that's Maine. And other states are, kind of looking at that, and so that would be very problematic. It's very problematic for Maine, and it'd be very problematic for all states, including us. So PFAS and other emerging contaminants are a big deal. So again, those are some of the things that we deal with. We have there was this little thing on Maui about injection wells a few years ago, and went to the Supreme Court. And we have some injection wells as well here in Honolulu, and so we're taking steps. It's a long process to do construction, but we will be getting out of those injection wells and recycling all of that water. We have injection wells at 3 very small treatment plants, so we'll be doing that, and that'll have a cost because we need to make high quality recycled water to be able to use for irrigation. But together those add up to a lot less than 1 million gallons a day. I think cesspools, as has been brought up a little bit, is generally a state problem, but we are going through the process to think about sort of taking ownership of that issue at the county level. And so we have a study. We're putting together a master plan. We'll be sewering some areas. We have some fairly big sewering projects underway now that will connect some of the cesspools. Several hundred out in Eva Beach will be connected. That construction will probably begin this fiscal year, and then some other areas have been studied, but we won't be sewering everything. We'll be doing some other, some on-site work, and so that's an important very important water quality issue, and we hope to be able to work in some areas where, and some others may talk about it, where there's measurable impacts in nearshore waters, and then so we have some before data, and then hopefully we'll be able to have some after data to show the direct impacts of that. So, another challenge that some folks know about, I think a lot of folks don't know about, is that there's a state law that says that all state and county buildings statewide have to be using recycled water for non-potable use by a certain date. And it might be 2045. Is that the right date? I think it's 2045. So this is not just new buildings. This is all existing buildings. And there isn't a lot of awareness of that and planning for that. But we are. We're building some buildings now, and they will have, toilets will be flushed with recycled water, and landscape will be irrigated with recycled water. Can be either black water or gray water or even stormwater. You can collect stormwater and meet the requirements. So that's an important thing. Not something I lose sleep about, but something that is interesting, and it's exciting, really. So how we're going to do that, where we're going to get the water, and stuff like that. But when you have mandates like that, it forces the chess piece forward. We have to figure out a way, to do it. So
I asked Roger that question yesterday on the phone. He said, "George, I don't lose sleep." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, great. Don't answer it that way, Roger." I invite anyone else to kind of what are your challenges or what's keeping you up at night with water quality?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time thinking about water quality. With Vi, we're working on primarily the cesspool issues, so thinking a lot about sewage contamination into the aquifer, groundwater, and onto the nearshore coral reefs. So I think a lot about coral reef ecosystems and pollution to the nearshore environment, and kind of in some ways similar to Roger's response, I really worry about the timelines, right? Of we need to address these things that we do have control over in the face of things like climate change and ocean acidification and these other global challenges and pressures that are facing our nearshore ecosystems. So through Vi, I'm learning a lot about the infrastructure side of things and how challenging it can be to get the massive amounts of funding that are needed and the workforce that's needed and the innovative technology that's needed to really get the job done properly to solve these pollution issues. So I do worry about that kind of race against these against time and against these global stressors that are also affecting the reefs. But I also think optimistically about this as well, because I've seen research coming out of different Pacific islands lately that's showing that when that stressor of sewage contamination, of land-based pollution is reduced or removed from reef ecosystems, they become more resilient to these other global stressors. So it's exciting also because it's something that we can do, and it is shown to really improve the ecosystem resiliency in the long term.
So maybe this is an opportunity to kind of jump into our opportunities, and I'll ask Tao and Lauren this. Starting with you first, Lauren, what are the current and near shore opportunities for water resiliency and water quality that you're excited about in your work? And maybe this is an opportunity to kind of share what you're doing.
Okay, sure. Well, certainly I think with climate change and everything that's happening there, I think stormwater is coming to the forefront. Obviously living on an island where we have a high amount of urbanization and more concrete continuing to go down as new neighborhoods are being built and the city's expanding out west. So I think low-hanging fruit items are things like green infrastructure, green stormwater infrastructure, and with that, if folks aren't familiar with the efforts that the City of Department of Facilities and Maintenance is trying to do with the stormwater utility, is an excellent way to get funding to support building in this resilience factor, start making sure that we have enough money that the city can actually maintain the existing stormwater infrastructure they have, put in new capital projects, and importantly, it also then means that money can go back potentially to the private sector or private properties to also do solutions on property. So what I mean by that is eventually if they have a fee that relates to the amount of impervious area on your property, you could get a credit on your bill by physically removing that concrete or putting in things like catchment tanks or rain gardens or other types of ways to treat and infiltrate it on property. And that to me is an exciting new opportunity for our city, and we're not the only city doing this in the country, let alone world. There's 2,000 plus of these utilities growing, and growing daily, literally by, I think the overall climate industry and stormwater is growing by 8 or 9% globally because of climate change. And so that's something immediately, it won't go through council anytime soon because of sort of the political will, but maybe in the next year or two you might see it and support it because it's, yes, it's an additional fee, but this is about building resiliency across our city. And I mean, maybe I'll stop there, but I mean, I have also gotten involved through a startup that we started a few years ago. We have a mobile and data platform called Follow the Drop. And one of the things we're trying to do with that is actually increase accessibility to these green stormwater infrastructure solutions so that everyone can have an idea of what your stormwater footprint is, and then using professional design standards that actually optimizes solutions for you so you don't have to hire someone like me. I'll put myself out of business, this is my end goal. But point being is, we all need to start getting more involved and aware of not just our stormwater, but our impact as a whole on the water system. And if we all can take small parts to do certain small things, that adds up to a lot and can be a community-based effort.
Okay, so as a researcher at a university, so we got the privilege of not having to deal with daily issues like what Roger has to deal with. So, to me, the near-term challenges or opportunities really has to do with the short-term water quality issues that we have to deal with. I was talking about the rural area, water quality in rural areas, and when you think about these rural communities, and typically some of them are really economically disadvantaged, and so no-cost solutions to their water problems would be something that that's important to us. So at UH, and we're trying to develop solutions, both socio-economical and technological solutions to address those challenges. So another area that I see myself as a researcher, the near-term challenge or opportunity is really to how do we further tie public health into our water quality issues. So when you look at, Hawaii is a state of tourism, and we depend a lot on our coastal water for tourists, both residents, recreation activities, tourism. But when you think about the future, climate change, increasing temperature, increasing or changing precipitation patterns, then some of the waterborne pathogens that are known to survive in warm coastal water could even become more abundant, and that could affect how human health for people who go into the water as well as our economy. So that's another area that we're really interested in. Just look at how climate change affect waterborne diseases.
Thanks. Actually, since your company by Christina, wastewater alternatives and innovations, are there any things that are kind of near-shore opportunities that are exciting you?
Yeah, so there's a lot going on at our organization right now, and I think we've had some great recent successes in bringing some new technology options into the Hawaii market. Basically for cesspool conversions, instead of converting to a septic tank, there's options to convert to different types of on-site systems that are better at removing pollutants than a septic system. So, in order for those types of technologies to get into common use, it needs to be approved through DOH and everything. And we've worked with Roger on this as well, getting some of these new systems ready for the market in Hawaii. So when a homeowner says, "Hey, I'm ready to convert my cesspool," they can use a technology that's going to really reduce pollution to the groundwater. So that's really exciting. And we also are in the process of developing a workforce program. So we're collaborating with the community colleges and a bunch of different stakeholders throughout the state to basically bring in a workforce that's able to do these cesspool conversions. That's something that's going to be a big bottleneck in converting 90,000 cesspools across Hawaii. So we've got funding, and we're in the process of building curriculum to bring people into the field. So I think that's really exciting as well.
Thanks. So this is for anyone. I think it's important to kind of sometimes see what we're doing well. So when you think about when it comes to taking care of our water quality and resiliency measures, like what is Hawaii doing really well?
Maybe I'll start.
Gotta have an answer here, guys.
So yeah, I mean, there's. I'm going to maybe go off on a little bit of a tangent. So one of the things that we're doing, and there's some folks in here that are involved. The city is involved in a One Water effort. So One Water is it's a construct, and it's kind of a national thing that a lot of folks are getting involved with, where we take utilities that are normally very siloed, drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, and environmental waters and nearshore water quality in general, and bringing them all together into a One Water, essentially a grouping, where then you look at everything together holistically, and everybody still has to meet their requirements, right? There's drinking water regulations and wastewater and stormwater and water and general ambient water quality, but there's some efficiencies in terms of technical, but also financial by all these organizations getting together. So the city has a fairly elaborate One Water effort, and it's established in statute, so we have to do it, and so we are doing it, and so we're collaborating. This is Board of Water Supply, Environmental Services, DFM, which is stormwater in the streams, and parks. Everybody that uses water, all the departments, and so we're working hard at that, and it's very promising. I think for the island that we would be doing that. As a subset of that, we're also doing something called integrated planning. Integrated planning is an EPA program that was developed to specifically, it's a little bit smaller subset. It addresses NPDES permitted activities. So there's wastewater, which requires NPDES permits, and then there's stormwater, which also has NPDES permits. So these are both Clean Water Act. So it's basically a Clean Water Act collaboration opportunity, essentially. And so the idea is that these two permitted utilities or areas of the Clean Water Act have very strict and continually evolving requirements that are complicated, costly, and generally ever more restrictive. And we have new emerging contaminants that we've talked about, which will cost a lot of money, to deal with. So what integrated planning says is, okay, you got these requirements, and they're not thinking about the other requirements and how that impacts the ratepayers, right, and what we need to do. So sometimes you get really strict in something that costs a lot of money, but you're not thinking about really the actual improvements to either public health or ambient water quality, nearshore water quality. And so the idea is that you would then be able to say, if I've got $100, I should spend this much in wastewater and this much in stormwater to get the best bang for your buck in terms of what's really supposed to matter, which would be water quality and human health, right? So it's a great concept, and so we're entering into that, at the city. So and so that study is just getting underway. But hopefully the idea is that we would be able to spend more money in stormwater, which is clearly a bigger impactor, if that's a good word, of nearshore water quality than anything going on with wastewater. So, yeah. So anyway, that's something we're doing. I did want to point out, because when we were saying a little bit ago, I forgot to mention that some of the things that we haven't talked too much about it yet, but sea level rise and climate change impacts. So sea level rise is going to affect the city in many, many ways, and it is going to affect all of our utilities, drinking water, stormwater, wastewater, electricity, of course, our transportation system, and some of those things are tied together. Our pipes are in the road on the transportation system. So some of the things that we're doing that I'll just name a couple. So most of our wastewater treatment plants tend to be right near the ocean. So will be impacted now or soonest compared to other infrastructure. And so what we're doing is we're raising, we're all new construction, and at these facilities are being elevated to generally to account for 6 feet of sea level rise. So that's a long time in the future, but our infrastructure lasts a really long time. So that's the approach that that we're taking, is elevating to account for 6 feet of sea level rise, in addition to all the other things that come with it, high tides and all the other stuff. So.
I was also going to applaud the work at the City and County of Honolulu as being a good example of a positive, with great leadership at the different water areas, whether that ENV or DFM. It's actually a good time to do action. I feel like we have had a really good run of, folks that are in those positions who recognize that we do need to move forward, and they're working collaboratively. So that's certainly a big win for Hawaii. And then they actually just won a national award. So congratulations. It got recognized for their One Water efforts. And I mean, even just on the building side, I mean, with TOD and others too, they're taking the whole sea level rise, climate resiliency, and created new guidelines for what new development should look like. And even just, more recently in 2020, we, City and County of Honolulu, well, the state adopted the new plumbing code, which will then allow us to do indoor reuse. And Sina's not here today, but we just got one more little piece to that puzzle to really kind of allow it to really bloom, which is to create the water quality rules for indoor reuse. And so the feeling is that she'll be moving towards adopting something similar to what California will be adopting at the end of this year. So we're getting all the pieces of the puzzle lined up, and having the leadership in there to make those actions move forward is, I think, something that should be recognized.
Yeah, one thing I can add is, from the university's perspective, is we have been really making strides in water quality area in terms of research, education, bring up the next generation of workforce in this area.
Yeah, I think Hawaii also does really well at valuing, or at least from the kind of also from the university perspective, I felt that it values the long-term observation versus just experimental science. And I think that's also rooted in the Hawaiian kilo. And I think that our research vessel at University of Hawaii is Kilo Moana, and we have a really long time series of oceanic conditions, and I think that translates to our nearshore water quality as well. There's a lot of great long-term monitoring, and it's hard to get funding to do long-term observations, long-term monitoring, but it has been valued by the university and by the communities. There's a lot of great opportunities for community members to get involved in monitoring the nearshore waters in their areas, and I think that's really important. We mentioned, one of the other panels mentioned earlier about the importance of feeling that you're part of a community, and those kind of engagement opportunities into the water quality and water resiliency landscape for communities is really important. So I just really appreciate the how the Hawaii community values observational science. It also gives us the resources to understand when there is an improvement on the infrastructure side, like how much does that affect the ecosystem? We can tell what the improvements are and really direct our efforts towards what's working best in terms of solutions.
What is a strategy or initiative for improving water quality that Hawaii could use or benefit from? Or in other words, where should we look for inspiration? Are there any models or locations that you feel are kind of a shining star?
I could maybe speak to it since we're talking about, if we talk about on-site reuse, the city of San Francisco has been doing this for a long time. They have had ordinances in place, mostly due to drought and also water quality issues, where they have a recycled water loop across the city. If you're within a certain distance, you must hook up, and this is for indoor reuse, not just for irrigation. It started off, if you were a building of, I believe, 200,000 square feet, you would have to have an on-site, basically use non-potable water for non-potable uses, including all your indoor uses for, cooling tower makeup water, toilets, et cetera. And oftentimes, if you didn't have the hookup, they would have to have their own on-site system to meet that requirement. And now it's moved down to 100,000 square feet. So they're definitely leading the pack in terms of have created those ordinances and also creating the water quality needs that would need to happen for that water reuse to go back inside buildings. So I know that our Department of Health looks to them and is part of what's called the Blue Ribbon Commission, which essentially what that is the head of the SFPUC, Paula Kehoe. She's the chair, but she brings and convenes different equivalent of Department of Health and actually Board of Water Supply. Barry Usagawa is also a member. Brings them all together so that people don't have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to on-site reuse. They can work collaboratively, pick up what's working in places like San Francisco and hopefully bring them back to their own jurisdictions. So, so San Francisco would be an ideal place.
One example I can think of is Singapore. So if you visit Singapore, you notice their sewer infrastructure. They basically just revamped it. They dig deep tunnels to transport wastewater from all over the small island to one location, treat it, reuse it. They have built extensive, dam reservoir system to connect rainwater for reuse. They have underground reservoirs. They have extensive research centers that focus on how to do desalination, how to preserve whatever water they have. So a lot of I was at Singapore and then I saw this new water bottle that they're trying to sell you to drink. It's basically coming out of the wastewater, and people actually accept that. I don't know how many people would willing to pay to buy that, but they're trying to sell that to people to drink. So I think Singapore has a lot of things that we can learn from.
From the angle of cesspool conversions, I think there's another island ecosystem completely different from ours, Long Island in New York, that has some lessons that we can learn from. They're another area that has an incredibly high amount of cesspools, and they have all kinds of environmental problems related to that, like harmful algal blooms, collapse of shellfish and other fisheries that were traced directly back to cesspool and septic tank pollution into the groundwater there. And it's pretty interesting to see how they've been able to do a really effective public outreach campaign, helping people understand that that's the direct cause of these ecological collapses that they've been seeing, and then use really creative financing to be able to bring funding in and help people convert their cesspools and septic systems to nitrate reducing systems that are actually cleaning up the water. So they're a little bit ahead of us in terms of where they are in the process of actually getting cesspools converted using innovative technology, and that's a really cool model that we can learn from as well.
So this is my last question, unless you had.
That's good.
Okay. So this is my last question. So think about your questions, because we have about 10 to 15 minutes left on this panel. And thinking about who's in the audience, and of course who's not in the audience, but if you had a magic wand, what would you have everyone in the audience or outside do to improve the future state of our water starting tomorrow, and why? Just let that sit for a bit.
Well, I mean, I'll jump in. I mean, I think that there's doable things that aren't too expensive, but just to be aware of. Just going back to half the problem is urbanization in terms of pollution, in terms of stormwater. And so if you have areas on your property that don't necessarily need to be hardscaped, think about how they could go back to planted areas, disconnecting your downspout, very simple techniques to just minimize the amount of runoff coming from your own individual property. So if you're not aware of what's coming off your property, I mean, think about what's being applied on your property. Are you using fertilizers? Does your dog poop in your yard? All kinds of, if you have any other chemicals, Roundup, all that kind of stuff will eventually go off your property and into the storm drain, ultimately into our streams and into our oceans. So with just small techniques, that can be done, literally are just to minimize that runoff from your property, and there's a variety of things that you can do for that.
Yeah, to me, the most one of the most important thing is education in the area of water quality, water resilience. So we need to have, undergraduate students. We need to have graduate students. So there's a UH does, the area UH has a really good strength, and we also need to educate ourselves. So that's how we continue to do research and push the boundary of the knowledge. And the last part is to educate the public. As we all have experience from this Red Hill situation, we have to get buy-in from the community, from the leadership, from the political class. So if I had a magic wand, I would do that. Everybody is educated.
The professor over there.
Go ahead.
I think we talked about PFAS a little bit earlier, but I think maybe one thing to add to those comments is, if you could magic wand PFAS out of people's household waste, right? That would be, if we're thinking about a future of Hawaii water use that includes water reuse and cleaning wastewater and reapplying it into agricultural lands, those chemicals of emerging concerns, contaminants, are going to be a real challenge. So I think that educating people around you about what they are, looking up what types of household products have them in them, your Teflon pans and various different kinds of household chemicals, and just trying to start removing them from your own personal wastewater stream, I think in the long term could help with the water reuse.
Do you want to maybe just, for people, I think it's a pretty advanced audience, but what is PFAS, so in case there's anyone here who doesn't understand what that is?
PFAS it's a contaminant of emerging concern. So basically those are chemicals that are found in the environment, in our products and things that are making it into the water, the soil, that are, we're starting to understand have negative long-term impacts. So PFAS has been kind of a hot topic in the toxicology world recently. It's something that is found in things like Teflon and various different kinds of household chemicals, and it basically just has negative ecological effects, negative effects on your body. And but it's basically a toxic chemical that it's persistent in the environment.
Yeah, PFAS is known as a forever chemical. It doesn't biologically break down. Polyfluorinated alkyls, and it's not one chemical. It's a family of chemicals. There's many of them. It's in firefighting foams, Teflon, clothing. Some shampoos, various products that are not toxic that you're using in a regular basis. You're cooking on them, and it's measurable in everyone's blood. But anyway, the two things that I would say to change: number one, use less water. We have a limited water supply, so everybody can use less water. You can also collect, reuse some water, collect some storm water. I mean, I have a rain barrel. Rain barrels are easy to get. Collect some water and do that. The other big one is don't use your toilet or any other things that are the drain as a garbage can. Okay, so I collect wastewater and I collect solid waste. So put the right thing in the right place. Chemicals going into wastewater is a problem, especially if we want to make recycled water out of it. But also, we've got to discharge it in the environment. Some stuff we can remove, some stuff we can't. Wipes, grease, all these other things, they don't belong in the wastewater. They belong in the refuse. Okay, so put the right things in the right place. It's not too hard to do. I think that would help us a lot.
Thank you. All right, open it up to the audience.
Sure. So my question is related to the Magic One question. Do you have a favorite technology that you are following or that you are hopeful for? Or similarly, do you have a technology that maybe has been attempted to be scaled here and failed? It would be interesting to know what happened.
So for those who didn't hear, it's what is your favorite technology that is here and or has been tried and has not succeeded, and why is that? Is that correct?
Start? Technologies. Well, there's a lot of interesting technology. With respect to, I would talk more about wastewater, so maybe it's not that interesting. I think there's a lot of interesting technologies in terms of, in terms of drinking water, right? But in wastewater, we can do reverse osmosis, and we can make water, clean water out of any water, seawater or wastewater. And we do some of that now, actually, in partnership with Border Water Supply. They actually do the treatment part and distribution and make ultra pure water using reverse osmosis. That works. It's expensive. They're also constructing a seawater desalination reverse osmosis plant out in Kalailoa soon. I think that will be beginning. I'm pretty sure that's programmed. So that's an alternate water source, the ocean. There's a lot of ocean. There's plenty of water there. And we have a place where we can put the brine, the high concentrate brine, whereas some other places cannot. Not sure that's a very good answer. Maybe you guys have some other.
I mean, I would like to think follow the drop is one of the best emerging technologies coming up. No, I'm just kidding. I've been working a lot with natural systems for a long time, and they're not my technologies, they're now adopted by the EPA, but very simple technologies using nature-based solutions. And so it basically encompasses a line system with media and planted with wetland plants, and it's not necessarily a pond, it's just, it can be below grade, and you don't see the wastewater, you don't smell it, and it comes out water quality, with an extra UV and some filtration, you can reuse the water. Very simple technology. It's been applied across the state. It's still being adapted in different kinds of ways, and more recently, and again in places in the continent, in San Francisco and in Portland and these urban centers, they're making them into more of these compact kind of tidal flow wetland systems so that they can fit in a smaller space and become amenities that have multiple benefits, like landscapes and shading and other kinds of neat things that a lot of them are attached to green buildings, but they're becoming they're equally as or probably more, they're definitely more affordable to operate than some of the higher energy systems that are out there, but it all comes down to like space and other constraints, but certainly a winning technology in my eyes.
Yes, if you want to run over here, but if you feel comfortable that you can.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So, listening to everything you're saying, and you brought up the Hawai. Have you guys, being that this is supposed to be the community, and there's only a few of us that are actually here from the community, maybe we should open up the panel again for actual community members, because some of them aren't in academia anymore. Some of them cannot afford to go to college. Yet, there are so many great ideas out in the community, as well as things that have been developed within the community. For instance, have you heard from Nation of Hawai yet? Sovereign group in Waimanalo. They have pretty much like 75% of from the mountain down. And a couple years ago, actually during the Olympics in Japan, when they were having all that problem with Tokyo Bay being polluted and things like that, there was a company that actually ran a nanotechnology system through the bay to kind of clean it out, to help it out. And it ran for, I believe, 2 days, and they tested it, and it came back clean. Nation of Hawaii has a smaller base machine, and they actually went to the state of Hawaii to ask if they could try to clean out the Alawai. Well, that was put to a stop because the state of Hawaii said, oh, that's city and county. They went to city and county. City and county said, no, that's department engineers with the Army. So that's been there for 2 years, sitting and waiting. There's been other suggestions to clean up the water in Wahiawa, the Lake Wilson. That's at a standstill also. So maybe that could be an option for you all to contact them and see what they can do with this machine that they got from you. I mean, you know, they are part of the community, so to speak.
Thank you for bringing that up. Is that the trash wheel? That is it also known as the Mr.
No, they
Trash?
actually haven't come out publicly with it because they were just trying to go through the state. But I'm not sure what they call it. They always just say it's nanotechnology. You put one hose in the water, it filters out, and it pumps out clean water. So if a larger scale of that machine can clean out Tokyo Bay well enough for the Olympics to take place, but the media not to get a hold of it, I'm sure this small contraption could at least, make its way up the Alawai or another small part of contaminated streams and such.
Thank you for sharing. In the back.
I'm interested in low development, like green infrastructure, specifically the NEDES permitting system. And I was wondering, when you look to either nationally or globally other regions to find the solutions that work for them and try and retrofit them for Hawaii, like what are the biggest, most important criteria that you guys look at to see how it can fit within our community, because Hawaii's water is so unique? So like what are the most important factors to figure out how to tailor it for us?
Is that a green infrastructure more or less question?
Yeah, or just, you guys mentioned San Francisco and
Yeah.
for other solutions, like what are the factors that you guys think about when trying to tailor it and bring them home?
Yeah, number one, starting off with, well, first of all, what we do have in place as a positive is for any newer redevelopment at I believe it's still the 1 acre scale, you have to put in green infrastructure. So that's happening now. The next part is 95% of the runoff is coming from private property or more. It's a huge amount of existing development that we need to get a handle of. So the stormwater utility is critical as a next step. And then really going in parallel with that is an incentive program. And so again, that means you'll either get a credit on your bill to make allow people to create that action. It also will create an industry, which will create jobs. It could have a lot of positivity across our economy. And so typical cities that follow that pathway have created pretty robust programs and as well as economy with it. And so, we're getting there. We've kind of started the process. The city involved neighborhood boards across the island to get their involvement. There was a stakeholder advisory group. So the stormwater utility is ready to go with political will and timing. And then with that, it's really important, I think, in just general, with you want to get people to take actions, we need incentives. And so really the cities that are really successful are putting dollars to where their policies are. And so and a lot of times that's because there's a sense of urgency. And so I guess I didn't mention what's keeping me up at night is, are we really feeling that sense of urgency? Are we really taking those steps forward? Because incentives are so needed right now to get private property involved as part of the solution.
One more question in the back, the gentleman in the blue shirt.
Thanks. Yeah, I had a couple questions, but first I wanted to all the people out there for bringing the community into the conversation. There are a lot of innovative solutions that are happening in small local areas that we think supply and others are helping to raise the dog. But my question actually has to do more about with, you mentioned PFAS, measuring PFAS in solids and in water. Obviously, there's evidence that microplastics are also able to cross the blood-gut barrier. And I was wondering what's being done to track that and address that challenge. How are you guys thinking about that?
For those who didn't hear, the question was around microplastics and the human body specifically. Is that my?
Yeah, about the human body, but also just like what's being done to track.
What's being done to track?
To mitigate the issue of microplastics in our water, waste streams, eventually making it down to the reefs.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the microplastics is pretty new on the radar screen. PFAS, now large municipalities like us, Board of Water Supplies had to make some measurements, and generally we don't have PFAS in our water here, but we do have PFAS in our wastewater because it's added to the waste stream from our products. Microplastics, we haven't started looking at that yet. So we don't have any data. I don't know whether that's something that's required for BWS to look at yet. So yeah, I think it's pre-emerging, emerging.
There's definitely some groups at UH that are looking at microplastics in the ocean environment, and there's also a few amazing nonprofit groups that are working on, reducing plastic in the waste stream to begin with. But the ones that are already there are very difficult to deal with. But Zero Waste to Oahu and Surfrider are great organizations that are pushing for plastic reductions overall.
Can I just add one comment to that? I work in some of the streams in the North Mahalo area of the Big Island. They're finding microplastics in streams pretty far up into the watershed. And one hypothesis is that these things are just falling out of the sky.
If I may
it's
add,
scary, but you did about it.
if I may add to this PFAS issue that you talked about, so at UH, PFAS is really a large group of compounds, very complex. So it's quantification detection in water samples is actually quite dilute. So it needs very sophisticated instruments capability. So at a Water Resources Research Center, so that's one area that we have been focusing on our capability building. So we're trying to get instruments, get personnel trained to do those type of analysis.
Do we have time for one more question? All right, last question for real. In the back, sir. Yes.
Thank you for the Board of Water Supply. Can I ask a question for these testing for microplastics? Erwin Kawata used to head our water quality division.
This should be. Hello? Can you hear me? There you go.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, for microplastics, we were part of a study about 3 years ago where a group of laboratories in conjunction with EPA was doing some methods development. So we took part in that study and we ran a couple of samples from our water system for microplastics, and we didn't detect any. Since then, the topic has remained, but as far as methodology and actual requirements to do the kind of testing hasn't gained too much traction. So we kind of still remain kind of vigilant with respect to any kind of requirements for microplastics. Okay, thanks.
Thanks for the clarification. All right, well, thank you to Tao, Lauren, Christina, and Roger.